If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com/FPA. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Finally, if you enjoy listening to FP&A today, please go to your podcast platform of choice, click the subscribe button, and leave a rating and review of the show. And now, on to the show.
From Data Rails, this is FP&A Today.
Welcome to FP&A Today. I'm your host, Glenn Hopper. And today on the show, we're thrilled to welcome Jared Backlund, the Vice President of FP&A at JFrog. JFrog is a DevOps platform that streamlines software development and delivery by managing, securing, and automating the software supply chain. Jared is a seasoned finance leader with over 18 years of experience, spanning iconic companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook. Known as a builder and innovator, Jared has a knack for creating scalable systems and processes that drive financial rigor and operational efficiency. From overseeing multi-billion-dollar capital projects to leading finance at cutting-edge startups, his career exemplifies the perfect balance of strategic insight and hands-on execution. Currently, he's leveraging his expertise in analytics and automation to revolutionize financial planning and analysis in the SaaS world. Let's dive into Jared's incredible journey and learn from his unique perspective on the future of FP&A. Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate you having me.
I love your background, and I kind of just want to dive straight into it. So maybe, I know I read through and gave that intro there, but in your own words, could you maybe walk us through your career journey, going back to starting in finance at National Semiconductor all the way up to your current role?
Sure. I'll go even further back. I was a failed architecture major. My mom is an artist, my dad's an accountant, and I decided to try and pick somewhere in between. And turns out I was awful at it. And after almost flunking out of architecture, I looked around and I said, hey, look at all my business major friends. They're tan and they have Fridays off. So I went over to business and just kind of picked finance. I was always good at math. And so didn't really know what a financial analyst was. So coming out of college, I had some interesting internships working for the state, making databases and training people. So very different jobs. And so I got a job, finally, it took me a while, at a place called National Semiconductor. And what was great about that was they had a rotation program. So if you don't know anything other than being good at Excel, which is what I was good at, they taught you how to be a financial analyst, how to budget. And this is back when FP&A and accounting were kind of the same job. So I'm booking accruals, I'm doing balance sheet recons, I'm doing SOX controls, that's coming out. And at the same time, I'm budgeting and doing AOP and all those things. So I think like a lot of people in Silicon Valley have been around a while. I started somewhere in the semiconductor world or Cisco or something like that. And then, at 22, 25, I got tired of knowing the guy across the cube from me with 5 kids was getting fired tomorrow because it's just in a shrinking company. And I just vowed to not work at a place that was shrinking. And I had a couple offers, and I can't tell you, it actually wasn't a no-brainer. There was actually better job offers than the one Apple gave me. But I was like, Apple had just come out with the iPhone, and that seemed good. And the iPod, of course, had just come out. So I went over there, and then I've never seen growth like it. It was just outstanding. I always say it was like trying to keep a train on the tracks. And so, I think I went from a junior IC to a team of 10 within 5 years. And it was just all being in the right place at the right time. And supported their call centers and then their extended warranty product, and then rolled up the P&L and balance sheet for the service supply chain, and put me in rooms with a lot of big executives. And, when Tim Cook was the COO, and that was always a lot of fun. And then started getting my MBA up at Berkeley, and I just wanted a different cultural experience. And so all my friends at Google were happy. I don't know if I was happy. I was working hard. And so I went over there and did some FP&A for them and worked in their G&A. And that's when they became Alphabet. So Ruth Porat came on board, and being around HR and benefits and finance was just interesting, especially at that time as we were becoming a very different company. And then I went over into emerging products, and I think I started with 1, I ended with 18 within about a year. And, it was just the place where we had a cell phone company, we had government projects, we had all kinds of things. So that was just a ton of exposure to almost like startups within a big company. And then Facebook called, and they had an impossible project. They needed to scale a system and some processes, and they were going from spending a couple billion in CapEx to I don't know, call it 8 or 9 figures or something like that. Sorry, more than that. It'd be like 11 figures in CapEx and racks and servers. And so went over there and I remember I asked the guy who hired me, why did it take so long to decide? He said, I didn't think you could make it. And I said, me? He said, anybody. I thought this job was impossible and you did it. And he was very proud of me. It was a very weird moment. But that was really, you talked about scaling, kind of my place where I went, okay, this is what I want to do. And then the pandemic hit and I've got a couple of young kids at home. My wife's a nurse, so she's going through all the things that you went through as a medical professional before there were vaccines. And I just decided, hey, now's the time to go jump into a startup. And so I went to a very small startup that I think I was employee number like 10 or something like that. And we grew up to 50 people. So I ran all kinds of things. I ran ops and HR. And I mean, there wasn't anything. So IT, legal, finance, you name it, real estate. And even ran sales and marketing for a little bit, came up with like an enterprise product with our head of product. It was a lot of fun. Sold that to a few people. So got to sell a few things. And then that company just didn't quite hit our stride, came out of the pandemic and didn't quite get the next round of funding. So then took a little time and went to work for another startup, was a CFO at a place called Skylo that does basically a telecom network with satellites. And it was just fascinating. I'd run a cell phone company before. So I knew a lot about telecom and I built 3 billing systems just in my career. And so I knew how to build billings. And those are the 2 things they needed. Someone who knew something about that. And then we had to raise money. And so we raised, that was the other thing I wanted to do and had just been through that process, but unsuccessfully. And so wanted to go through it and be successful and had a great time growing that team and adding all the head of FP&A and things. And then an opportunity came up to go back to a public company, a little bit kind of small to medium cap, get back into SaaS, which I'd done a bit before in my career. Just was a great opportunity to run FP&A and just tremendous boss, tremendous group of people to work with, really strong company. So it was kind of one of those things where I'd done my time as a startup CFO, realized that I wanted something a little bit bigger again. And Skylo is still doing an amazing job, but needed something for me kind of a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah. I want to dive in a little bit more on Facebook and Google and Apple. But before we do that, you said something early on that, just your first finance role, you were good at Excel. So they kind of stuck you in the role and then you kind of learned from there. The funny thing is, I think back on my own career and right after business school, I was a journalist before that. So I didn't have the experience in finance and accounting. And like you, FP&A and controllership were still kind of linked together. But I really thought that the way I was able to move up very early in my career was I could use Excel and I'd always joke, it's Excel and PowerPoint. It's like, I don't know anything about business, but I can go crazy in Excel and PowerPoint. But really, if you look back at what that really meant was I could build the models and then in PowerPoint, that's the storytelling part. So when you take all the models and you convert them into telling a story, and it's like, it's funny watching as FP&A evolves. I sort of said that as a self-deprecating, way to, I don't know how, the only reason I'm promoted is because I'm good at these, but it's funny how those two have consistently contributed in the career. And I know, storytelling, especially if you're trying to raise money or when you're trying to scale up and justify expenses and you have to explain these massive CapEx expenses, it's as much about the models as it is conveying the message across too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll probably add a third one on there and being good with people. And that goes all the way to communication and just being likable too. It's part of your job in finances. I often don't say yes. I often have to say no. And so you have to learn how to say that in a way that, doesn't burn down relationships and withdraw too much from the relationship piggy bank, the old Carnegie thing. But yeah, you're spot on. And, I think a lot about, if I were coming up today, you're right. Like I didn't know anything about a budget or Hyperion or any of the things I was supposed to know about, but I knew I was really good at Excel and I knew how to simplify it in a way that people understood it, right? Because a lot of people can add a dollar sign to things. That's what I tell people my job is a lot, is I just add dollar signs to things. But being able to summarize it, being able to present it to a VC or board of directors or another exec so that they understand it because they're thinking about 1,000 things like that becomes your superpower, right? And then you can kind of adapt to whatever business you're working on.
But the other thing that is, I think, really stands out in looking at your progression through your career is being at those big companies and being there at these scaling moments. So what are the most valuable lessons that you learned from being there, scaling the teams and the processes and going very quickly from small sort of hypothetical and in theory to getting traction and taking off with these things?
Yeah, I've definitely been very lucky, and it's been very, very fun to be a part of the ride. I'll come back to the same old basic kind of people, process, and systems, but the people side to me ended up being the most important because I found out not everybody likes to scale, not everybody likes change, not everybody wants to constantly trying to improve things. And so I learned pretty early on that when I would bring people onto the team or we would find new people to partner with, I had to find the right mindset too. And Apple, Google, and Facebook got really good at screening for those people. But I found kind of some of those common characteristics of almost the main thing I used to interview for at Google and Facebook was dealing with ambiguity. Just this ability to walk in on a Monday, work your butt off for 2 nights, and then me come in Wednesday morning and say, we're going to throw all that away and start on a whole new project and not be pissed at me about that. Right. And so finding people who thrived in those situations and finding out myself that that's where I thrived. Right. Some of it was just finding a match for who I was, as well as kind of being in the right place at the right time. On the process side, then it became about figuring out, okay, it's not about designing the perfect process. I have plenty of friends who worked at places where they get canned reports every month on forecast versus actual. They get headcount. It's got dashboards and everything. And I don't usually walk into a place that has that. And I see that as a good thing. And so when I design a process and even a system, I have to think about levers. I have to think about in a year, 2, 3, 5 years, what are the levers I have to be able to pull so that I can adapt this to wherever it is I'm going next, right? Wherever the business is going next. And so that kind of became the mantra of trying to figure out and trying to frame for people, okay, how do I find the people who have the right mindset? How do I bring them on? How do I encourage them, develop them? And then how do I figure out how to develop a process that isn't so rigid that I can't grow with the business? Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to fuel the innovation here. And then from a system side, it's finding tools that are the most flexible and being, you can spend a year and a half putting in a giant FP&A planning tool. And maybe that's the right thing to do for your company, but usually it's not. Usually you need supplemental tools, or I'm a big fan of guerrilla systems. I would build my own analytics teams. I would kind of build my own systems from tools or from hiring people that can do those kinds of things. And that allowed me the flexibility on the system side. So really that flexibility and mindset process systems is how I thought about it. And it wasn't always easy. You also got to love it because you got to work hard. Like it's just a lot of long hours just to get it done,
Yeah. Yeah. Just thinking about, going back to your first job at a company that was shrinking and then being at the big FANG companies and then being at a startup. Maybe this is too open-ended a question, but I'm going to throw it out anyway and see what you think. But compare and contrast, like sort of that first FP&A role that you had, and then being in a startup environment where whether you're bootstrapping or whatever it is, you're on a specific runway versus being somewhere like Meta where you've got this, billions of dollar capital budget. What stands out distinctly from each of those, or what, or do you learn from each that you're kind of able to apply what you take away from each situation to the next situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think every time I interview somebody, their first question to me when they LinkedIn stalked me is, what was it like to be at these 3 places? But I actually think, to your question, the more interesting part is like the journey within and the different size companies. So it changes at each of these companies too. So again, when I joined Apple, the group I was supporting spent $100 million a year. Within 4 was spending $2 billion, or something like that. And it was a couple $1 million at Google or $1 billion at Google. So we were looking after and all those things. And there's 2 things. Like there's some things that are in common, some things that are different. So the things in common is that people equals politics, and people are important everywhere. And so no matter big or small, you've got to navigate kind of working with people, influencing folks, bringing them good financial analysis, playing that role of financial steward and helping them to play that role too, and so those things don't change. I don't care how big you are. What does change is where you need to spend your time. So at a big place, when you have a lot of resources, you're worried about the really big swings. You're worried about that contract with that vendor that's half your spend, and you're trying to figure out how to shave a penny off of a rate or something like that. Like, so you spend most of your time and you point your team and your resources at that, right? And you win a couple of really big swings a year. And if you win those, then everything else kind of takes care of itself, right? And then you hire folks that can kind of run the process that keeps the ship lights on. And at a smaller place, to your point, it's much different. You have to be so flexible because it's literally like my CEOs would come in one day with a new crazy idea that took millions of dollars we didn't have and said, we need to pivot tomorrow. And it's not you have to have 10 meetings and a committee and a governance and 6-month project and a project plan. It's no, like we're going to actually pivot the company within a week. I actually think that's generous. Let's give it till Friday. And let's figure out the resourcing plan and all of those things. So that one is about like, you got to really know your numbers. Like at any part of our job in FP&A, you need to know the numbers. But like in that one, you're talking people's jobs here. You're talking people's livelihood. When you're negotiating salary, it matters. When I'm making offers and I'm negotiating with you and you ask me for an extra $5,000, at a startup, I'm really paying attention to that. The big company, I may not even be involved in that. So I think it's, really getting in the details, knowing those numbers, living it day in and day out, and not putting in too much process. Like just not worrying about it at a small company. They just don't need it. At a big company, it's about, what are the things that could break and go wrong, and making sure you've got enough safeguards in place around that, and then trying to win a couple big swings a year, right? If you can bring a new system on, if you can bring a new insight or two. I always say one of my parting gifts from leaving Apple is I worked with a group to raise the price on one of the AppCare Plus products, and because the margins weren't good enough. And so I remember that whole conversation. And so I think that it was the right thing to do for the company, for the business at the time. But, those are one or two big swings that make you a couple $1 billion now, right? So those are the things you want to win on. And so it's just that mindset and the flexibility too. And at a startup, when you're raising money, it's all about that. And there's nothing else. You're kind of single-minded focused. At a big company, it's like, I've got 25 meetings back to back to back, talking about 25 different things, trying to context switch. So they're all just different skill sets. You just got to find what you like and kind of dive into it.
I think just having seen both sides of the coin, you sort of take positives from each of them. And also, so you've had, I'm sure, at the bigger companies, access to much cooler software and tools that are built in and much better clean data and everything versus at a startup where the data dictionary hadn't even really been defined.
Oh, a dictionary.
And the metrics are...
That's good, Glenn, as if they're dictionaries.
Yeah, right.
I wrote a dictionary.
Source of truth. What's truth?
Me, I was the source of truth. No, you're spot on. Like at those big companies, I mean, everything's custom. Oh man, so everything is built for you into your specifications, which is both terrible and amazing, right? So the hard part of it is you got to know what you want, and you got to understand the details, and you've got to lay it out, and you've got to design it, and you've got a IT team who's also talented and really good and has great ideas. So they want to take what you want to do and they want to put their spin on it because that's their job too, and they're very good. But they don't know anything about finance, or maybe they do. Maybe they've got an MBA or they used to be in finance. And so finding ways to work with people to get the best outcome, you never do anything great alone. And what happens at a bigger company is there's more people on the boat trying to get the thing done, and there's maybe less scope and broadness. But at the same time, it's all about, at a startup, it's usually 2 to 6 people really getting a lot of really cool things done. And that'll happen in different parts. The engineering will have that group, and sales will have that group, and finance and G&A will have that group, and the executive team. And so you're all kind of doing these things together. But I think at Apple, Google, and Facebook, it was great. I was definitely spoiled in that anything we wanted, we would just design. And then it's just about prioritization. And so you could customize and build. I had a full front end and back end. This is dating myself, but before Tableau really became a thing, we had our own version of Tableau that I had someone build, and he is just an outstanding developer. Built us a full security system on the back end, things you can buy now, but you couldn't back in the day. And at Facebook, gosh, we had things. we could produce like a board deck with a push of a button. Like, isn't that cool? Like, you're just like, wow. Like, I wish I had that today. I can't tell you how long it takes me to make a board deck. And the data's cleaner, and you've got ITGCs, and you've got people whose job it is to just maintain the data. And then you go to a startup and you don't even know if data's turned on. Like, it took us a while to figure out we weren't collecting any data. We're like, well, no wonder we can't analyze it. There's nothing here, right? And so you're walking with engineering being like, can you turn this on? And, it's 2 a.m. and you're testing a billing transaction with your engineering guy in LA, and you're having a good time, just trying to figure it out. And then you get to kind of the place where I'm at now, and it's kind of a mixture in between, right? Like, it's a fast growing company. And so the data is mostly clean, and it gives you a chance to kind of put things on top of that. But most of the things you do aren't customized because, who's got that, $100 billion budget that these big companies have, right? So you're buying things out of the box. So you're having to be a little more selective on kind of picking your tool, and then flexible as you think about it.
Yeah. And it's, we were talking before the show about data and analytics and how they're really transformative. And I was thinking, since we were talking about that, we've been talking about digital transformation for 30 years now. It's really, and as we move into
it got a cool
AI,
name. It's now called digital transformation and RPA, and it's got cooler acronyms now.
Yeah. What's interesting to me now is I've been, and we talked about this too, I've been a huge data guy for years. Like, once I sort of leaned into statistics and started playing around with R, and then that's kind of a gateway drug into Python. And like you said, when Tableau came out, it's like, wait a minute, now we can do some cooler stuff that we weren't able to do before. And then whether Power BI or whatever the platform is. But what's interesting to me now is when we used to talk about digital transformation, it started in IT, and I felt like, at least in the experiences I went through, finance and accounting, the office of the CFO was barely even consulted or involved in this at all. Mm-hmm. And now in my day job, we're selling digital transformation and analytics to the CFO's office. And it's because I think sales and marketing, there was, like you mentioned, data, like they were the early beneficiaries of some of the big breakthroughs in machine learning, because when everything was online, there was so much data, and they actually had big data that they could work with, versus finance and accounting, we had the GL. And it's like, we have nothing else. So being able to kind of expand that and add other data to it that we're able to work with. But I want to get back to what you said, though, about clean data and great analytics, how transformative they are. And I want to really focus that to the CFO's office. And maybe you can tell me sort of the evolution that you've seen. And you've had the advantage at being at these big companies where they did have a lot of data. So you saw the power of data early, even before you came to a startup. So you kind of had a mold to follow when you came into the startup space. So I'm wondering, did you take from Apple, Google, Facebook, sort of some ideas? And then, so how do you now approach building analytics? I guess it's 2 parts. It's the collection and aggregation, sort of the processing of the data, and then the team, and then the tools that you use. I mean, you have to think about all that. So walk me through kind of what you learned and how you use that today.
Yeah, it's an outstanding question. And to your point, it's been a journey for those who have been on this road for a while. It's certainly changed a lot. So I remember, just like you do, when it was just financial data. And you didn't even think about, let me pull in this metric, or let's pull in this. And getting business data was really hard. And then there was that transformation where we started demanding, you know what? I want to see the sales in detail. I want to see what you see. I want access to your data table. And then people start having data tables that you could pull in, right, to your Tableau or to your Power BI, even into your Excel. And you started being able to marry financial data with business data. And you talked about this early on, but you're spot on. Then the storytelling got easier and more fun, right? Before it was, I'm looking for that nugget of insight. A couple of years ago, I did this interview. I think I was between roles, and they wanted me to do like an analysis on some department spend or something like that. And I think I wrote them back and I said, great, can I have like some extra data? Because all I have is like a vendor name and some dollars. I'm like, what I'm going to produce for you, you could get, at this point, you could get Excel to do it for you with an AI plugin, right? And so being able to marry in that business data, I remember when that happened, and that was really powerful. And then there became too much business data. Then there became 450 columns and you only need 3 of them. But the genius was knowing which 3 that you needed. And that's where I started adding value. Everywhere I've ever been, I've built an analytics team. I think it comes back to just how you're wired. But I think very operationally, and I think with analytics and the things I learned from the big companies I always take with me is you need a set of key metrics and you need to double click on that. So you need your KPIs and you need your little exact dashboard. Even the nonprofit I do a ton of work with, we just made our kind of 9 KPI dashboard for the board, right? And we have the metrics underneath it, but we don't have any data people. We're just kind of figuring it out. But like every organization needs some version of that. And that's what I think finance people are great at, is figuring out what are those 9 or 18 metrics that really matter and how do they change over time. When you start building an analytics team, it's changed over the years. So to your point, engineers used to always live in an engineering world, and they would take it all the way up until data's clean and you put a front-end tool like Tableau on it. And folks like you and I weren't allowed to use SQL or Python or Power BI to even mess with things. We were not allowed.
That's when citizen development kicks in and you're like, I understand I'm not allowed. And I hear you loud and clear, but guess what I'm doing on my laptop right now?
I'll be honest. Yeah. Guerrilla Systems. I remember I sat next to Apple's, I guess she was our corporate controller at the time. And I had lunch with her and she was asking me, what are you excited about? She's putting in a new system. I'm I'm building these Guerrilla Systems. And her face went white. And I was just like, oh, I should have told you about that. She's like, okay. I'm just kidding. I'm not doing that. And it's become different. So the first time I built an analytics team, it was like just to find someone who could get along with engineering. So we could talk our way into getting data, right? And trying to analyze transactions and things like that. Then it became about, I started to hire engineers. Right? I started to hire data scientists, right? I started to hire people that weren't just report producers. And so you started, going from left to right, from the person who's the engineer actually doing it to the person who's actually reporting on it. I would hire people all over the spectrum. And it wasn't just this single person, this analyst on the front end who can produce a report and tell a story. It was like the people who could put the whole package together. And that's been very different. And even today, it's, you talk about tools. In the last year, 2 years, like the introduction of AI and just kind of the flood the market with all these kind of FP&A or finance tools has made me think very differently. I went to my team last year and I just said, systems are great. I've spent my career building and designing systems and making sure they work great, but we actually need to spend a bunch of little money on tools. We need to try out a bunch of stuff because there's so much stuff going on. One of the startups I advise is a startup called Anchor. And they've been thinking about a couple of different things, but what they're focused on now is a go-to-market kind of FP&A agent, like someone to come alongside you and give you things like CAC and TCV, top 20, and all those things that kind of the type of a sentence. And that did not exist 6 months ago, and it didn't work as well as it did 2 months ago. Right, every month it gets better. And so the pace of transformation, I can't spend 12 months putting in a new planning system all the time, right? I can't wait. I can't hope that one of these big companies or even mid-sized companies is going to develop the next great thing. And so you need a great planning system, but you need to supplement it with these little tools and you need to be trying all these new ones out. That's the only way I think to keep up with it now. We both talked about at the beginning about Excel being our superpower. Man, if I were starting today, I don't, everyone needs Excel, but if I wanted to be in finance today and I was 22 coming out of college, I'd be great at SQL and Python and R, and I'd know Redshift and Power BI, and I would take some classes on communication and slide building. And I would do some things. I'd take some MBA classes on building out and managing a business and how to do those things, because finance, our role has just evolved. We have to be much broader than we were. It's not just about producing financials or sticking to a budget anymore. Those are table stakes. Now we've got to know the business, understand it, have insights, provide a different point of view. It's a great place to be. It's a more dynamic role than it's ever been, but it's also changed kind of what I need as a leader now on my team.
FP&A Today is brought to you by DataRails, the world's #1 FP&A solution. DataRails is the artificial intelligence-powered financial planning and analysis platform built for Excel users. That's right, you can stay in Excel. But instead of facing hell for every budget, month-end close, or forecast, you can enjoy a paradise of data consolidation, advanced visualization, reporting, and AI capabilities. Plus, game-changing insights giving you instant answers and your story created in seconds. Find out why more than 1,000 finance teams use data rails to uncover their company's real story. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Learn more at datarails.com. I feel like financial analysts, we were the OG BI people. We were the first analysts, but then we didn't have the data that sales and marketing did. And so we got caught flat-footed, I guess. We didn't evolve. And now I still have a debate with people in the FP&A community. I think that if I were starting a career right now like you, it would be, I'm going to get a master's in finance and extensive study in data science. And that I have seen some universities are now offering an MBA with analytics, and I'm seeing more data science and statistics courses. But because I had to before there was machine learning and compute, and I had to come up through statistics. I really think that that's your basis right there, and then you go from statistics to machine learning to data science there. But with AI coming along, and you look at Copilot. In Microsoft Copilot isn't there yet, but whatever 13, 15 billion, however much they've invested at this point in between OpenAI and the other AI companies they've invested in, Copilot is going to be all the stuff that we took such pride in, our complex formulas, our nested if statements and everything. That's all going to go away because people are going to be able to do that writing in natural language in English, or English becomes the new programming language, or whatever your natural spoken language is. So the way that we stood out in the past by being good at building models in Excel is going to stop differentiating us. So we're going to have to we have to know the right questions to ask. We have to have the domain expertise of finance so that we know the difference between EBITDA and net income and operating income and all the stuff that we have to know in ours. But we're also going to have to then know the basics of data science so that we know the questions to ask to analyze the data, because we're going to be able to do it. Python's not going to be a barrier to entry. Now it's going to be great if you know Python, because then even if you're getting an LLM to write code for you, you can QC your own code and you can give it better instructions if you know it. But I think our whole role is going to change because, you mentioned RPA, and I think RPA was great. It was a pain to set up. It was very rule-based and all that. But with LLMs, they're going to have contextual awareness. And so whatever the next flavor of RPA is, it's going to be much easier to set up because it's going to have this contextual understanding. So if you look at sort of these lower level sort of data entry, and then that first level of turning sort of data into information, that's all going to get chipped away. So where are we going to, as finance professionals, add value? And it's going to be adding that extra level of analysis that you have to have a data, an analytics, data science background to do.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I'd love to add a few things, and then we can talk about where this thing is going or where we think it's going, because it's fascinating. It's going through quite a transformation right now. I mean, just like accounting is as well. I'm watching that happen as well. But at my old startup, our analytics person put in a company called Mode. And Mode answered my very simple questions that I would ping my controller for. Can you remind me what this invoice was for this vendor, right? Can you tell me what revenue was in October, right? Just dumb things like that. And I realized, oh my gosh, no longer do I have to ping my team on Slack. I'll ping an AI bot and it will give me all the answers I need. You talked about it, the debate I hear among folks on my team is, this has happened for a long time, but FP&A and a lot of the cool things we do get outsourced, right? It's easier to get headcount if you're in sales or marketing. So you hire sales ops and rev ops and marketing ops. And those are cool jobs. So I don't know. I think if I were starting out today, I wonder if I might go that direction. I guess the difference is when you're 22, you're in finance, you're sitting around a table of executives and you're watching and you're learning from them. You get a seat at the table at a very early age. So I actually think starting in finance is still really smart. I think about where the world's going. To your point, everything I was great at, I think is going to go away pretty soon. And so, I've been demoing some new planning systems, and I'll tell you, they've got 4 or 5 different models for forecasting on spend and revenue that I think will do just as well as probably I can. And I remember back at Google, they built revenue models and they pointed it at expenses. And this is 10 years ago. we could forecast it better than a team of 100 FP&A people, just because it was easier to watch the trend. And now the ML models are just stronger. They're just better. These aren't time series like, simple linear trends anymore. There's some really cool stuff. And as I hire data scientists to kind of supplement who don't know anything about finance, they find me better insights because again, they know the data, to your point. Like, they have that point of view. And so as a leader, I think a lot about, when most of my friends who grew up as software engineers started in English or philosophy back before they had majors, right? So all my friends taught themselves how to code. My 11-year-old knows more code than I think a lot of us did who took C++ out of college and high school. And it's just fascinating to me. So when I think about finance, one of the things we do really well, one, we storytell, but two, we're one of that groups that can see the biggest picture, right? We can take a step back and we can take this unbiased point of view and say, I'm going to think about this with the big company picture in mind. I'm going to look at that. And so the folks who can be creative in the questions they ask, the folks who understand how business in general works, who can look across all the groups and connect all the dots, I think that becomes the new superpower. I don't think you have to be as great at building models or building a chart or doing those things. There'll be room for that, but that'll go away and get automated for the most part. So then it becomes about, how do I take the same set of data that all these people have access to and come up with a better insight? And that to me is more creative. That's more artsy. That's really flexing kind of that right side of your brain, which is fun. I think has been maybe missing from finance for a long time.
Yeah. And it's what's going to be interesting is, there's sort of this, we've always had this notion of paying your dues. Like, well, you've got to do the data, you've got to do the low level stuff so that you really, really deeply understand it. And I don't refute that, but I also think that, I think back, this is dating myself a lot, but Excel was around. I'm not quite that old.
Lotus 1, 2, 3, is that what you're going to tell me a story about?
But I had several professors who made us, we couldn't use Excel. We had to use financial calculators. They really wanted you to get to know how to do the net present value and do all the things in the financial calculators. And it's like, looking back, that didn't make me understand it anymore. And when it was so much, it just took so much more time than if I could just put the formulas in Excel. And I think so, I said I wasn't going to refute the idea that, well, you have to really know these sort of basic things. But if you understand them conceptually, that's the thing with the human brain versus AI. You don't have to go through a million reps to get it, to understand what's happening. And then you can start providing value just because you understand what's going on there.
Yeah, and maybe I'd ask you a question. Like, don't you think if you were, let's say one of your kids came to you, and I think about this all the time. I have an 8 and 11-year-old boy, and the other day my 8-year-old came to me and said, hey, how do I calculate, this thing has a 20% off, I want to buy it. How much does it cost? And so I taught him with a piece of paper and a pencil. And he's like, why are you doing this? Why wouldn't you use your calculator? I'm like, well, son, it's good to know. And no, it's not good to know. Like, you don't need to know. So maybe my question for you is, don't you think, or maybe how would you design it of, couldn't you educate and build a different education for these folks? Like, think about one of the things that made me better early on is they would hire us in cohorts of 6 people every 6 months. That not only created a bond, but they actually put us through education classes. They taught us accounting. I didn't know anything about accounting. They taught us how to use Excel. I actually taught Excel classes. That was one of my early things that I was good at. And couldn't you do that today? And if you were to do that, wouldn't you leave out all of these sum ifs and, X lookups and everything? Wouldn't you instead focus on, here's the simplistics of how a business model works and gross margin and all those things?
I mean, the crazy thing is, though, you have to ingrain that logic in there. So it's almost like when they stopped doing this. I'm getting in just full old man yelling at the clouds now. But we used to have to diagram sentences, and we had etymology classes and phonics and all. But diagramming sentences at least gave you the structure. In phonics, all those things did too. So I think learning the language of coding in Excel or learning a coding language, I'm thinking back to some of the first, this might have even been high school, even pre-college, but the lessons that you learn, coding requires a logic, and you have to remember, okay, I'm making a loop here. I have to be able to close this loop and, for F and, for whatever in range, so that you know what to put in the loop. So I wonder if there's a way that you could teach the logic of it, but you don't have to know the language. You just sort of know the structure of it. And that's the focus. Because I think there's a lot of things that we used to, really pride, being able to build a Black-Scholes model and run that. It was that's how you could show that you were, you knew your stuff. And
I got a reward on that. I remember when 123R came out, we paid one of the big four. I don't want to guess which one, but I think I know which one. A lot of money, and their model didn't work. And I got it to work, and they gave me like $250, and they paid them like $100,000, even though their model didn't work. And I just thought, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's like you need to have that domain expertise. So I don't know where the balance is.
It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing. But I just brought a data scientist into my team, and it had done an internship with us and doesn't have background in finance at all. And so I find myself, my youngest kid uses Scratch, and I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's like, it's the intuitive way to learn how to program, right? So when I had to learn how to do C++, it was the first thing I ever learned, and it was not easy. And here's my kid dragging and dropping and learning the concepts of code construct. And so for the data scientist, he doesn't know what gross margin is. So I pull out a pen and a whiteboard and I go, okay, here's why it matters. And here's those things. And smart person, a lot smarter than I am, picks it up in a second, and you go, oh, okay. So as long as you learn the right concepts, right, it at least gives you a bit of a foundation. And so to your point, are people going to come up that are this combo of data science and finance, right? The storyteller and the logical analyst? Or will there be people whose job will just be the storytelling and the interfacing and the business partnering, the decision support? And then will there be people who are more on the analyst side? I don't know. Like I saw accounting make that kind of split between technical and kind of operations and systems. Maybe FP&A will make that split, and maybe we won't even own forecasting. Like maybe the system will do it and it'll sit in accounting or something. I don't know. Like it's those things that we used to get all this value for. I just finished AOP. It was a lot of work. In 5 years, like maybe it'll be a push of a button. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's actually, in thinking about that, where we continue to provide value. So I'm thinking, we talked about data and analytics, so we're thinking more like classical and machine learning, but you add generative AI now to it. And to me, generative AI is it's just a doorway in to be able to access without having to know Python and SQL, a way to get to your data and a way to run these models just using natural language. And I see that really catching on. And I do see it changing the way who's able to access the data, what they're able to do with it. If we've been talking about democratization of data for about as long as we've been talking about digital transformation. But I think with generative AI, you're actually going to see democratization of data science. Again, people have to know the right questions to ask. They have to have the right kind of domain expertise to even know the difference. With your strong focus in data and analytics, I'm sure you've ventured a bit into beyond, sort of the classical AI. But where do you see, with sort of the developments now and all this talk about agents, where do you see AI having an impact and what it might do to areas like forecasting that we've talked a lot about, but even in process automation, going back to the RPA thing?
Today, for the last 20 years, whenever I had an idea, I either go off and do the work, or I bring together my team and say, hey, can we do this work, right? Let's figure this out. What I've started to see with, say, this AI agent from Anchor that I mentioned, or some of the demos I'm seeing, they're not there yet, but you can see this hope that all of a sudden you've got this person on your team who's great at this stuff, who's great at the analytics piece, but they don't have all that finance context that you were talking about earlier. They don't know that. They haven't sat in a room for 20 years and they haven't worked till 2 a.m. trying to figure out how to make a budget file submitted in SAP or whatever is broken for that day. And so what you're able to do, especially as a leader, but even I see my analysts do this too, if you can ask it the right questions in the right order, then suddenly things that used to take 2 weeks for your team to pull together, you're done in an hour or 2 hours. So suddenly you can ask better and different questions. So right now, the way I think about it is I think about how far can you click down. So you start now and you're at a startup and you don't have any data. So you start with a high level KPI and that's all you got. It's like, how many people do we hire this quarter? And then you go, well, I want to cut that by location and P&L function. You realize, that's not worth it. Like we hired 3 people. So that's great. We hired 3 people. You go to a big company, you hired 1,000 people in that quarter. You're Amazon, you hire 50,000 in a week. And you go, okay, well then suddenly the double click gets interesting. And so right now I find in finance, things I used to be able to do in Excel, there's too much data. So in some ways, like Excel is now this hindrance to me. I can't pull things out and actually do things in Excel like I used to because it just breaks it. I have too much data now. So now I've got to have these tools. Then right now I can go, let's say 2 clicks down. I can start at, gross margin and I can go a click down, maybe 2 clicks down. I want to go 5 clicks down, right? I want to trace it back to a deal. I want to think about it from, if I'm selling a phone at a cell phone company, I want to trace that margin all the way back to the original PO. I can't do that today. And if I do, it's a very long project and it's all those things. I think that's what these tools are going to do. I think these tools will allow me, instead of going to my group of sales FP&A folks and saying, hey, can we look at kind of, attainment or, kind of contract distribution or industry or things like that. I can go, hey, I want that. And then it's done in 5 minutes. And then I go, oh, great, let me dream a little bigger here. And so suddenly, like, again, the art becomes being able to ask great questions and being able to keep digging down until you find that insight that you can bring back. So you're still in the same business of trying to find insights. You just have now more powerful tools to go deeper and deeper. And so you're able to, I guess I'd say, optimize more. You're able to kind of bring forth and say, okay, I didn't just show you a trend. Like, I showed you how to change the trend and how the trend is going to affect us in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I love your drill down because that is the way we think about dashboards. And I do think about what you'll be able to do with generative AI, where, in a dashboard, you can click down a couple times, but there's that problem solving methodology that is, what is it? Ask why 5 times to just really get down to the root. And if you could drill 5 times down in all these in your dashboard or whatever, or have the system proactively do that for you and identify that. I mean, I think that's, if I'd been telling you this 5 years ago that I was dreaming of that, you would say that's far-fetched. I don't see it. But now with generative AI and what it's able to do, it's like, yeah, we may be 24 months away from
absolutely,
systems that can really do this. So.
Yeah.
So I have a lot more I want to cover, but I guess I want to run out this ground ball a little bit, and then I want to come back to some more sort of strategy and decision-making kind of questions. But so thinking about, because you've run data and analytics pretty seriously with your teams and you see the value in it and you kind of see the writing on the wall here, but looking at, so this is going to be a 2-part question, I guess. One, looking at where we are today and kind of reading the tea leaves, how different do you think FP&A teams will look in 5 years? And then, how the roles and skills will evolve over that time. And we've touched a bit on that, but I guess the second part of that question is, and this goes back to our education piece, if you're hiring now and you're like, I'm trying to hire people that are going to be with me for the duration to ride this wave, what are you looking for? What skills are you looking for? You're hiring for an FP&A position, but you're trying to future-proof it. And then, maybe there's you hire with these fundamental skills and then there's going to be reskilling and upskilling over the next 5 years.
Yeah. And these are great questions. On the first part, in 5 years, we're a cautious bunch of folks, but I go back and I'll go to the CFO job. So when I first started, every CFO came from what was then the Big 8, now the Big 4. And you were more of a controller, not even a technical accountant. I don't think that had really come up, but you were much more of kind of an ops finance person pulling together the financial statements and could explain it really well to a board and to the executives. And would weigh in on things like M&A and debt to equity ratios and things like that. So kind of very tried and true, kind of, accounting, kind of very numbers focused. Then I started to see that evolve and I started to hire people out of investment banking, right? So instead of hiring people who started in the Big 4 and had some accounting in background, I started hiring people from Goldman Sachs. And suddenly, like, they had a different view on finance. They were thinking about valuation and they were thinking about funding. And here they are, they're supporting, an engineering team. And they're thinking about it from like an ROI perspective in a way that maybe those with the accounting background weren't. And now I think what we're going to see is you're going to see folks probably like you and I kind of continue to march up the train. I'm one of many of my friends who think this way, who are going to eventually be in charge in the next 10 to 15, 20 years. And suddenly you're going to see these teams become the source of truth for data, right? And I think they're going to have to figure out how to use that data to be amazing storytellers. I think if they're going to evolve, I think the brand that we should actually be pushing is storyteller. I've been thinking a lot about 25 and kind of what I want to do with my team. And I keep coming back to the what and the how. And the what I think is going to get more and more automated, more and more kind of data reporting. We got to keep the data clean, but we'll figure that out. And other people are interested in that as well. And that's actually becomes a big part of the job, is making sure the data is right. And so then the what changes. Instead of the what becoming 80% of your job, maybe that's now 50% of your job, 40% of your job. And the how starts to really matter. Now, I'll tell you this, I've never met a 22-year-old who's great at the how. And so, no matter who I'm hiring, I'm hiring people who are coachable, right? To your point, it's too hard to see. I used to hire for people who had been there and done it before. And then after watching some of these giant companies scale and just realize that no one's ever been here before, right? And I think we're in that moment when it comes to how FP&A and finance is evolving, where I don't know exactly what we're going to need. I need someone who is data minded, who's coachable, who does the how really well, who treats people well, who manages people well. Finance people are usually terrible people managers. I mean, I think I had 9 managers in my first 2 years, and I think it made me realize I want to learn how to be a better people manager and treat people well.
I mean, it's straight Peter principle, right? Just because you're very good at building spreadsheets and models and all that doesn't mean that you're going to be good at managing people. And without the training, and also a lot of us, if we go into finance, it's kind of like engineers. We go into it because we like that heads down deep work where we would much rather just be lost in a spreadsheet all day or writing code or whatever it is all day than having to deal with somebody's PTO issues or conflict, across departments.
You're spot on. And so I think when I hire today, I'm looking for folks who have more of an analytics background, like probably they have a finance degree too. Though economics is pretty interesting, especially when you hire outside the US or have had global teams for most of my career. A lot of them don't have kind of a business undergrad with a finance. They might have accounting or they might have economics or statistics. And so they kind of have this mindset towards numbers and applying them towards a business, right? And then I think more and more I'm finding myself, once you find those people, then finding those who do the how pretty well. And it's not always the same person. Like sometimes you've got this team of analysts who maybe I would never want to put in front of the group of people to present something like it. And to your point, they want to be heads down and they don't want to be in front of that group of people. That's not who they are. And I don't need them to be that. But this version of my team, that the people I hire, especially at the leadership level, they've got to be great storytellers and they've got to treat people really well. And that becomes the defining thing, I think, of us, right?
Kind of on that, when we were talking before the show, you mentioned something that really resonated with me just because I feel like this is my same mindset. And I think there are a lot of people, and there's a place for these people as well, but, they would rather just build the reports, explain the reports, and they can do their storytelling and talk about the data and everything and be that just sort of deep understanding of the data. And they want to be the report person, which it's hard to go from sort of having that expert deep level where you can talk about every cell in a spreadsheet to the strategy person or to the ops person. But you described yourself as a builder, and that really resonated with me. And it's one of my, so as we record this, 2024 is coming to a close or rolling into 2025. And one of the shifts I want to make in 25 is I spent so much time in 24. I built a lot of courses. I've done a lot of lectures, a lot of podcasts, webinars, and all that, where I'm talking about this stuff, which is great. And, hopefully it's meeting some kind of need out there in the market. But what I'm champing at the bit to do is going back and building something again, which I have not spent as much time as I want to. And I've got a lot of prototypes and everything, but they all became kind of secondary to building. So since you said that, tell me your approach to it and kind of what is it that excites you the most about creating systems, processes, and putting everything in place to scale? Because that's almost like the combo CFO/COO role, which I've had a couple of positions where that was the case, and those were very rewarding to me. And it sounds like you're kind of in the same mold there.
Yeah, I definitely run those roles, and especially at the startups, played more of that function, and even officially at Bright. You kind of just go through life and you don't really know where you're pointed. At least for me, I'm not super savvy about my career or think about those things. But at some point in my life, I was going after a bigger job. And it was kind of a long shot, but they came to me and I was like, sure, why not? And it just kept going. It was one of those things, you just kept getting further and you're like, oh, okay, this ought to be interesting. And it was just one of those jobs you're just like, yeah, of course you would have to take this. And you're like, but of course they're not going to hire me. And then it just kept going. And as part of that, I've had some wonderful mentors over the years, and I still have some wonderful mentors, and trying to help out other people as well on my side who are on their journey. But I had someone sit down and kind of said to me, you've got to figure out what kind of CFO you want to be. So it's a CFO of a big public company. And it's just like, do you want to be the operational CFO? Do you want to be the strategic CFO? Do you want to be the one who takes them public? Do you want to be the one that is there for a turnaround, right? Do you want to be more of like the P&E where you're like going to go in and you're going to run this business, right? And you're going to have the most important seat at the table. And so I sat down and I thought a lot about the experiences and to your point, what excited me the most. Because it sounds like for you, you're doing some reflection and going like, Facebook had this great definition of a strength. So strength is something that you're good at and you like to do. I find there are a lot of things I'm good at that people tell me I should do more of. And the bosses is like, you're great at it. You should do it. I'm like, okay. And then it took me a while. It took me to get to Facebook to realize, it's okay if I also do things I like to do. Right. And so discovering that kind of word builder came from diving into that question my mentor gave me and working with my exec coach and just saying, okay, like what would define the things I enjoy the most? And when I look back at my career, it was walking into, back to that Facebook story, I love the impossible problem. My superpower is taking a bunch of really disparate data, a bunch of different points of view and pulling it together into a vision and then rallying people behind it. Like that's what I'm good at. And I happen to be pointing that at finance. Right. But to your point, it has a lot to do with operations and thinking. And so I think it just came down to like what gets me excited to get out of the bed in the morning. Right. Here's the piece that loves it. And probably in general, I like to keep moving. I'm a very busy person on purpose. One of my mentors called me a polymath. I didn't know what that word meant. I had to look it up. But I like I like a lot of different things and I'm good at a lot of different things. And that gives me even more joy. And so that's really what it became is I love the impossible problem. And scaling is that. Scaling is the art of the unknown. It is I have no idea. All I know is things are going up and to the right. I have no idea how they're going to get there. I have no idea what the business is going to have to do to get there. They're going to have to go into Kuala Lumpur and sell a bunch of something, or they're going to have to start up, move our headquarters to, Australia. Like, who knows, right? But it's going to take something that we've never done before. And so, my job is only as exciting as the businesses I support, right? I work in finance. I'm a function. Like, I love serving people. I love serving teams. But, I want to help a team and I want to help a business that's figuring out how to kind of go up and to the right and the unknown of that and being able to solve the day in and day out problems. Like that's what excites me, right? Because I can't look at a playbook. There is no playbook. I always tell my team, I have a little slide that I've compiled over the years that says how to work for Jared. And it's the good and the bad. I'll tell you, here are the things that are going to drive you crazy and here are the things I'm good at and how to use me. And one of them is have a conversation with me. Don't send me a 14-page email. I'm just not going to read it. Like I will, but like I won't digest it the way I would if we had a 10-minute conversation. And so to me, building is a bit like that because it's that ebb and flow of having a conversation, thinking through it as a group, and then picking a path and going after it. And those things I love to do. I love to brainstorm. I love to work as a group. And I have no problem making a decision. And so that to me is kind of building. And so when I found that out and I found that word, I thought, okay, I'm going to point my life at this from a career perspective.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like we could go all day, but I should wrap it up here. Otherwise, the producers are going to start yelling at me for having another 90-minute podcast. I guess if you're Joe Rogan or Lex Friedman or whatever, you just go and have these 4-hour podcasts. But maybe there's a limit to how much people will listen to FP&A.
What are you talking about? This is just like Joe Rogan. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Yes, sans the big bong or whatever.
That's not what that is behind you? Okay.
And then and I guess for Lex Friedman, I'd have to wear the black suit and tie and all that, the dressed like the Blues Brothers or whatever.
Oh, I like a good reference.
I can't let you go without asking our canned questions that we ask all the guests. So the first one is, what is something that people might not know about you that they couldn't find, just from Googling?
You might be able to find this with Google, but so I got a couple boys I mentioned, 8 and 11. My wife's a pediatric nurse, and we live in a place in the South Bay in California and kind of the Silicon Valley. And it's a town called Mountain View, and there are 542 homeless people. And that includes people, we have a lot of people living in recreational vehicles and cars, so we'll call them traditionally unhoused. During kind of a break between jobs, which is why I always encourage people to take a break between jobs, because it allowed me to pursue some of this. But I met some of the nonprofits working around kind of helping with this problem, I guess. And the one that I spent a lot of time with is called United Effort Organization. And I think I'm on their, I think the website lists me as their CFO. I'm on the board now too. And it's just one of those things where you talk about scaling. We, for the last 3 years, kind of started during the pandemic to help people find housing. And we were making 30 grand a year in fundraising, mostly grants. And this year we'll raise 300,000. So we 10x to money. And, I talked a lot with my kids and friends and mentees about like, you got to use your gifts and talents more than just at your day job. And so this was an opportunity for me to not only be on the ground and be the hands and feet and helping people, but at the same time, like use my gifts and skills to be part of a team to do this. Like it wasn't all me, but I was part of that team and played kind of the money part of it. And so it's a ton of fun. We're still volunteer driven. The only employees we have are people who are currently homeless or formerly homeless. I think we helped 56 people kind of find housing this year. That's making a dent in that 542, right? And that's up 50% year over year. And so we're dreaming big. We just finished our 25 strategic plan and working on kind of the 3-year plan. But I tell you, man, like that stuff, it just doesn't feel like work. But it's using the same skill sets I use all day long. I ran the process for our strategic plan at my company and for the AOP, and then I ran it for kind of this nonprofit. Now, very different processes, they're very different, very very different time periods, commitments, all those things. But just finding that thing that gets you excited, that doesn't feel like work, but uses your gifts and talents to help people. Like talk to my kids a lot about that, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, and that speaks so much to, we're all so busy and there's enough day job work to do that you could work 100 hours every week and still not be finished.
Yep.
And it's being ambitious and wanting to exceed in the corporate world, takes a lot out of you. But the fact that you're able to get that work-life balance and be able to be there for your day job, for your family, and to be able to pursue something in the community like that, that's commendable. It's got to be, there's probably a book in there and how and how to, time management, just to, talk about how you do all those things.
Glenn, have a great support system. I have a great therapist. That's helpful. I have a great exec coach. I have a wonderful wife, and Glenn, I don't always do it well, but it's one of those things too. I think by the grace of God, you kind of just do what you can do, and you show up. And showing up is half of it. Like that's the other thing. It's just you just got to be there. Like that's so much of parenting. One of my best friends, he's having a kid, and I'm super excited for him. And he's just like, he calls me probably a month ago, and he's just like, I'm freaking out. I'm like, why? And he's like, well, it's coming close. I'm like, okay. And him and his wife are wildly successful at giant FANG companies, both of them just crushing it. And he's like, what do I do? And I said, I don't know. He's like, why? I'm like, why do you think I need? He's like, well, you're a good dad. I'm like, yeah, because I show up. It's like, that's half the battle. Just being in the room, paying attention, not on your phone, not like on your computer, not working. And so when you talk about work-life balance, I don't know if any of us really have that. I think that's such a personal thing. But at the same time, it's being in the moment. My wife talks a lot about it. She's a nurse. Like she's a pediatric nurse. She screws up, like bad things happen. And so she has to be in the moment for 8 to 12 hours a day. Like that's really hard to do. And then come home and be a mom. And moms always work harder than dads, no matter what family you're in. And so it's just, it's one of those things where I tell you, you got to find it though. Like, and I haven't always been great at it. I will confess and say most of my career has been just working lots of hours and enjoying that and focused on those things. But, as you get a little older and you realize like, again, how do you use your gifts and talents outside of just kind of your day job?
Now, everybody's favorite question. I usually, I don't know if you're a regular listener of the show, but usually I try to prep people. I did not prep you for this. I'm going to ask you just off the cuff. What is your favorite Excel function and why?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Can I go old school here?
Please do. Yeah.
So like not too long ago, in an embarrassing amount of time, someone showed me XLOOKUP and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I'll be honest, I refused to use it because I was like, VLookUp, I swear to God. And there's two reasons that it's like, I'd say there's three reasons VLookUp's my favorite. One, I'm old school and like I refuse to learn XLOOKUP. Two, I took an interview during that time when I got offered a job at Apple. I got offered a job at a different company. And what had happened is this big company had bought this little company. And the little company was full of jerks. And the jerks, no one wanted to work with them. So they got rid of like 6 finance people in like a year. Because they would be like, I refuse to work with this person. And I remember one of the questions he asked me was, how does VLOOKUP work? And I think I got it slightly wrong. And he's like, you said it so confidently. I still want to make you a job offer. But I just remember it like, so I will never forget that moment where VLOOKUP almost cost me a job. And then third, it was the first formula I remember teaching when I used to teach advanced Excel where like people are like, oh, this is so helpful. And I just thought, okay, this is my claim to fame. I'm great at Excel and I'm going to teach people VLOOKUP. So that's why it's my.
That's so funny because I was at a CFO conference giving a presentation a few weeks ago. And I was talking after the presentation with a group of CFOs and somebody said something about VLOOKUP, and then everybody in the room saying, you've immediately dated yourself, which I never even realized. Yep. But the funny thing is, so I was a guest on FP&A Today long before I was the host of it. And that was my answer was VLOOKUP. Nice. And now I realize it's because I learned Excel in like the mid 90s.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was the coolest thing ever back then.
It was the coolest thing ever.
And like you, it's like, yeah, I get there's index match and XLOOKUP and all that. Who cares? But also, I was a CFO for 15 years. So you get out of doing a lot of the formulas and everything. So you know, it's like, I don't know. That's when I used to use VLOOKUP all the time when I actually was in Excel all day, every day. But I did see, next time somebody asks me that, I saw this somewhere online, but someone answered that question, merge and center, which just made me laugh.
That's your type A right there. Yeah, I love that.
Merge and center.
I'm really lazy. I use a lot of count A still.
Yeah.
I just don't know how many are here.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. So the last question, if our listeners want to connect with you and follow you, what's the best way for people to reach out?
Oh, probably right now it's probably LinkedIn. I think there's some things I've been thinking about for next year that I think you and I talked about kind of before the show, but before we got on here. But I think LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. And I'll be honest, I'm always down for a conversation. I been lucky enough to have a number of mentees who are now far surpassing me in their career achievements, which is wonderful. A lot of former mentees who started as accountants who are now CEOs of companies. And you're like, wow, okay, like you're way better than I am. A lot smarter, a lot more talented. And
maybe they'll flip the tables and hire you at some point.
I tell them, I said, anytime you want a head janitor, you just call me. I'm right here. I'd be really good at that. I don't know if I would want to work for a former CFO. Would you? I don't know.
Yeah. Good point.
You're doing it wrong. Oh, am I? Okay. But yeah, so I think find me on LinkedIn. My name's spelled kind of interesting, so it wouldn't be that hard to find.
Okay, and we'll throw a link in the show notes too. So. Awesome. Well, Jared, I really appreciate you coming on. Great conversation today, and thanks again.
Thank you, Glenn, for having me. Appreciate it.